right, you're on.
Hello, this is Lulu Sue, and I'm so glad you are able to tune in to Amateur Pianists. Now, of course, this is Lulu Sue, and I'm so glad. Hang on just a minute. Tune in to Amateur Pianists. Okay, that was a little reverb. I had my iPad on. Thank you very much for showing up today. And this is our first virtual recital, or it's actually not even a recital, it's a virtual event. And as everybody else, we are all trying new things during this time, and hopefully you will find it rewarding to share your hour and a half this afternoon with us. For those of you who are new to Amateur Pianists, I want to say that we are a group for adult pianists. Whether you've never played in your life and never ever wanted to play, or you've played all your life and you have aspired to be a wonderful pianist, or anywhere in between. The purpose of our organization is to encourage adults to enjoy and pursue music, piano music, if that is your ambition. So without Oh, okay. I'm hearing a little bit of. If you should have any technical difficulties, if you could write a comment. We have a wonderful tech support person by the name of Glenn Kramer, and he will hopefully help you sort it out. Without, also, in the coming months, we don't know when we will actually be able to gather again as an organization. If you should have any technical difficulties, if you could keep reading your mail, because I write a comment. Know when we have a wonderful tech support person. In the meantime, we are very pleased and very fortunate to have John Gutheil with us today. Also, and he will in the coming months, share his experience when we will actually be hearing a gather again as an organization. If you should have any technical difficulties, as you could keep reading your mail, because I write a comment. We have a wonderful tech support person. In the meantime, we are very pleased and very fortunate to have John Gutheil being very candid and honest and sharing his thoughts on being a competitor in. And with that, I will turn it over to John.
Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you can hear. Bear with me just a minute while I make sure that this is set up correctly. Hope that's correct. You can hear. Bear with me just a minute. Okay. So as Lulu said, I was going to give a bit of experience that I've had in performing in amateur piano competitions. Let me just hold on, I'm getting some feedback. Just a minute. My apologies. In amateur piano competition. There, I think I took care of it. Okay, so just amateur piano competition. Start over again. Here's my take on amateur piano competitions. Let me show you my little face there. There we go. This is a learning experience for me. So what are the topics that I want to talk about? First of all, I want to talk about why one would even do a piano competition in the first place, and I'll give you an insight a little bit into the application process. Talk a bit about the repertoire that I've chose and some advice that I've received from people in participating in these programs, and then also the type of preparation that I think is required. I'll I'll talk a little bit about what it's like to be at the competition and also what it's like after the competition. In addition to the lecture, I am going to play some recordings from competitions that have accumulated over the years. So I've listed those recordings here. None of them are longer than about 3 or 4 minutes. So hopefully people will bear with me while I do those. So and I want to start off with a performance. This is actually the very first piano competition that I entered. It was the Cliburn competition. This was the first piece that I played in the first round. So I do hope the audio comes through, but it's the first movement of the Beethoven First Piano Sonata. So, I understand people can't hear the piano. Hold on just a minute here. Hold on. Apologize again. Let's see if this works. So, I understand people can't hear the piano. Hold on just a minute here. Apologize again. Let's see if this works. So, I understand people can't hear the piano. Hold on just a minute here. Apologize again. Let's see if this works. This sounds like a bit of a mess. Is that right? What's that? Yeah. My apologies again, everybody. Bear with me just a minute while I try to take care of the duplicate audio. Oh. Okay. All right, let's try this one more time. All right, let's try this one more time. Sounds like sounds like we still have a fair amount of duplicate. I apologize for that. I will try to work it out on the fly here and see what I can do. I've been getting some comments from people about various things to give a try for. Yeah, okay. All right, got through that. Hold on just a couple seconds. Sorry again. Okay, let me continue then with a few points. So first of all, why would one enter a competition? I've actually listed the cons first. It is a matter of endless practicing, and certainly one has to put aside the time to practice as much as is feasible. You do end up missing a lot of family and friends as a result. My wife certainly went to a number of events by herself when I felt like I needed to practice instead. It is relatively expensive, both in terms of lessons, recording, the application, travel involved, and of course there's the time off work. It's quite easy to burn up most of your vacation time participating in a piano competition. What are the pros, though? You do get to play for a very large audience, which is quite exciting. And at most of the competitions, they produce high-quality videos and audio that you get to keep. Of course, if you then try to live stream them, they may even pay 3 or 4 times on top of each other, but they're high quality nonetheless. You get to play on an excellent piano in a wonderful recital hall. I must say, at the Cliburn competition, it was probably the best piano I've ever played on. I like to tell people they had a technician on site during the competition, and every third participant, they would break for 15 minutes, and the technician would come out and tweak the piano so that the next 3 people would also have an excellent piano. It was really quite an experience. You do get a bit of a sense of what it's like to be a professional classical musician, at least for a day or two. Which is interesting, and I guess at the end of it all, you do become a better pianist. I certainly feel like I improved with all the practicing that I did in preparation for this. So there are a number of competitions. Which ones do you want to choose? I've actually played in the Cliburn twice, in Seattle once, in San Diego twice. I haven't played in Boston, and I have not played in the Paris competition either. This is just a short list. What I was trying to show here, though, was that there's a number of differences between these competitions. Some of them tend to come and go as well, so if you're interested in a piano competition, you really need to look online and see, are they really holding the competition I'm interested in again? Some of them have gone out of business even in the few years that I've been paying attention to them. But you'll see some are yearly, some are every other year, every third year, every fourth year. The other difference is the size. Some attract a lot of applications. The Cliburn typically gets about 200 applicants for their competition. There are other competitions. Boston is supposed to be a bit smaller, I understand. And the other interesting thing is that some competitions have different age limits. The Cliburn cuts it off at 35. You have to be over 35 to join the competition, to enter the competition. And some also pay attention to whether or not you've had a music degree. So Seattle, for example, has basically 2 categories of amateurs, those with degrees and those without degrees. So for me, without a degree, it was kind of fun to be in competition with folks that hadn't spent 4 years at college studying classical music. What's involved in the application? Almost always it's some type of recording. There's Cliburn requires a video recording where they can see your hands and your face while you're playing, but other ones may only require audio recording. Seattle, for example, just required an audio recording. Usually they ask for about 15 minutes of music. They let you play whatever you want, and they That's what they use to decide who's going to be brought to the competition. If you are entered, they ask for a biographical sketch. They want a picture for their program. And various disclaimer forms. It's interesting. I know it surprised me the first time I read it. Basically what they say is, we know you're playing the piano, but everything we record belongs to us, so don't ask for it. There's application fees, a few $100s usually, and as you'll see, usually the fees are the least amount of the expense in participating in these competitions. Applications are usually due about 5 months in advance. You're usually told about 3 months of it in advance whether you actually are accepted, and there's usually a cutoff for final repertoire about 1 or 2 months ahead of time, where you can change the program and swap some pieces out if something isn't going quite right. Okay, I had some other music here, but bear with me just a second because I can still hear a slight echo on my side. Let's see what I want to do here. Hold on just a second. Okay. Alright, I've got an idea that something that might fix it. Keeping my fingers crossed. Monitor off. Take care of that. All right, let's give it a try. This is so this is actually one of the application pieces that I submitted to Cliburn this past year. A quick little Bach invention. Jeez. I really have to apologize for the not being able to get this sound to come through. Let me try one other thing. Boy. Oh, jeez. I really have to apologize for the not being able to get this sound to come through. Let me try one other thing. If I don't figure this out in a few minutes, we'll just go ahead without the performances. I really have to apologize. If I don't figure this out in a few minutes, we'll just go ahead Testing. There we go. Okay. We're back on, I think. Yeah. Um, the pieces can be anything by a published composer. Usually memorization is not required. I think Paris is about the only place where memorization is required. But of course, pieces cannot be repeated, so one can't do the same pieces over and over again from one to the next round. Um, the one piece of advice I've heard from others in the past has been that you really need to do some pieces that you're familiar with. This isn't the time to decide you're going to learn something that's very challenging and try to make that work. In terms of preparation, the pieces can be anything by a published composer. Usually memorization the right teacher is important. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And then also performance opportunities, things like Amateur Pianists here in San Diego or anywhere else, anybody else that'll actually listen to you play. I found one issue was taking care of your hearing as well. If you're kind of playing at a nice big grand piano in a tight little room, one thing you want to make sure of is that you don't end up with ringing in your ears after it's all done every day with your practice. I want to talk a little bit about your visual presentation on stage and also dealing with performance anxiety, which is a big deal. One piece of advice that I thought was reasonable was to start at least a year in advance, if not 2 years. And I can tell you from experience that a year almost does not seem long enough to actually prepare. In terms of the right teacher, this means different things for different people. You may want to look for somebody who actually has a fair amount of performing experience themselves. I found that very useful. They have a lot of comments about how to prepare for performing and how to deal with the various problems that come up during performing. The other thing that I think was very useful was your teacher's connections with professional musicians. One of the things I really enjoyed was my teacher was able to set up lessons with well-known pianists that on particular pieces. Even though it was a single lesson, it was quite an experience. The caliber of their other students, of course, is something that can be important. You can certainly learn from listening to them. And their availability and flexibility. Obviously, that's very important given that you've got a day job. And cost, although while this is probably one of the larger costs in preparing for a competition, it does seem to be money well spent. And the one piece of advice I would say, if the teacher you've chosen to help you with this isn't working out, you might consider changing teachers if that is actually needed. You're going to put all this effort into it. I think you need to make sure that you've got everything lined up in your favor. In terms of performance opportunities, there's always families and friends. I think my family and friends figured out that pretty much every time they came over to our house in the evening, they were going to be forced to listen to me play something for at least 10 or 15 minutes. They didn't seem to complain, but they're very polite. We did put on some recitals at the house as well, where we invited larger crowds over to kind of help prepare for the competition. The retirement homes around San Diego, there's a number of great places at retirement homes. Some of them have quite nice pianos, actually, and they're usually more than happy to have you come by and perform. I already mentioned Amateur Pianists in San Diego. That was a wonderful place to try out pieces. There's other piano groups in San Diego. There's master classes. I did several of those, which are a wonderful way to work on a particular piece. And then, of course, as I said, you can also, I was surprised, you can contact a lot of professional pianists and, for a fee, they'll give you a lesson. They'll sit and listen to your piece and tell you what they think, which is probably, which generally are the type of people that are going to be judging your performance at the competitions. And the last thing I would say is that this is an opportunity to prepare for the competition by doing everything that you would typically do in the competition at these performance opportunities. So try out the various clothes that you're going to wear. You don't want something that's too confining. Whatever you're doing for performance anxiety, you can go through your relaxation techniques. Give that a try. anything that you think might have some impact on your ability to perform, this is a place to kind of give it a dry run and try it out. I mentioned protecting your hearing. I actually ended up with some ringing in my ears the first year I prepared. I think I was probably playing a little too loud and too long. But there are these wonderful classical musician earplugs that one can get that actually I think anybody that's used earplugs in the past knows that the typical foam earplugs kind of take out all the high frequency sounds and kind of make things sound kind of bassy. But there are earplugs available that actually take out more of a consistent amount across the sound spectrum. They're not expensive. I think these run $15 or $20, but you might look into these if you're going to be planning on playing for a long time. What's the word on music? It seems good?
Right now you're good.
Oh, geez. Well, let me try one more piece. I'm afraid. Okay, hold on. Here is another audition video. So the Black Keys Etude. Here we go. No music? Oh, jeez. Oh, boy. All I can say is maybe we'll fix this by next time. What's the word on that music? It seems good?
Right now you're good.
Oh, jeez. Well, let me try one more piece. I'm afraid. Okay. Here is another audition video. So, Black Keys Etude. Here we go. I understand that there's some echo on there. Doesn't look like we're necessarily going to be able to figure that out. So my apologies for that. Let me go on with the talk. First of all, there's some surprising issues with stage presence that people are probably unaware of. I do like reading the scientific literature, and there actually has been a fair body of investigation around what makes one pianist better than the other. As you might think, most people would say, well, it's the sound. And the problem is, if you test that in a rigorous setting, it actually isn't the sound. It's actually the visual impact of the other stage that seems to make most difference. And the way they looked at this was kind of interesting. They took a single audio recording of a pianist playing a piece, and they actually got different people to first pretend that they were playing it, and then they showed that composite video to a bunch of judges or other musicians, and saw how they were affected by different movements and body styles and things like that. And as it turned out, some things might be a little logical. First of all, if it was a female that was playing the piece, again, this is the exact same audio recording. It's just it's being dubbed over onto a video of a female actually performing this piece. Females were judged to be more kind of dynamic and more, romantic in their interpretation of things, whereas male performers were judged to be more precise. So, same audio, people thought the male played actually a little more accurately. Some things might be a little logical. First of all, as I alluded to, though, the interesting thing is, though, what about in competitions? And there was an interesting study done where they took videos and audios of a lot of the winners from professional piano competitions, and they asked people to judge, other judges, who was the winner of the competition based on either having them listen to the sound, or watch the video with the sound, or actually watch the video by itself. And the interesting thing was that people were most accurate in judging the winner by just watching the video with the sound turned off. So, I honestly don't know quite what this means, other than your appearance on stage is probably very important to convincing people that they that they like the music they're hearing. The one other piece of information from this study, as I list here, on the left is what people said was the most important thing when they listened to a pianist, and 85% of people said it was the sound, not the visual thing. But in terms of actually selecting the actual winner, over half the people were better at selecting the winner in a competition just looking at the video rather than very important to convincing people that they that. I'll try one more thing to get rid of the echo. Oh, okay. Anyway, so it's very interesting that people think sound is important, but the visual impression on stage is important as well. So here's a few points, right? I mean, you should dress appropriately. Nobody wants to watch a slob play classical music. Act confidently, even if you're not confident. So I remember one of the things an instructor once told me was to take a bow properly, and the one thing he always hated was people that took these short little bows, and then it's almost like they didn't mean it. So he says when you bow, count to 3 before you come back up. And then there probably is a role for some hand movement and body movement in playing the piano. At least in my impression is that it actually can improve things like rhythm by incorporating, kind of choreographing your hands as well, and I think that plays well with the audience. I'm not even sure if I want to try this anymore. I'm going to skip this. If anybody cares to listen to this music, basically everything I'm showing you can be listened to on YouTube. If you type Gutheil and Cliburn, what I was going to play for you here were several of the pieces from the preliminary round in 2016, so you can listen to that. And then because the Cliburn competition was canceled this year, they invited us to submit videos for playing, and most people submitted their submission videos because they didn't want to record again. So you can find under Cliburn, I think it's called Cliburn Amateur Spotlight. There's several of the other pieces that where you see me in green music. Those are the pieces that are on the Amateur Spotlight. So I'm not going to put you through any more recordings on this. So, performance anxiety. This is something all pianists deal with, and there was actually the research on performance anxiety goes back to like the 70s. It's kind of fascinating. Um, in the old days, there were even pianists that would take a shot of alcohol or something before they went on stage to kind of calm their nerves. And I think everybody's aware there's reports of some of the best pianists who get horribly anxious. Glenn Gould, I think, was kind of gave up his stage career because of anxiety in performing. Um, but there was this musicians' health survey which was done in 2015, just a few years ago, and I've just shown here a slide from this survey which talks about what the symptoms of performance anxiety are, and I'm sure these look familiar to everybody. I certainly can attest to at least three-quarters of these. I probably don't have nausea, but that's about the only thing. Um, so how do you deal with performance anxiety? Again, lots of research, and there was a nice paper I came across from Melbourne that talked about teaching conservatory students how to deal with performance anxiety. It was a 3-week course, and their data suggested that it was moderately effective in dealing with performance anxiety. The dirty little secret, though, in among pianists is not so much uh, uh, psychological interventions to help deal with performance anxiety, but it's actually the use of beta blockers. So beta blockers have been around since the 1970s, and they basically counteract the effect of adrenaline, so epinephrine. So when you get scared and anxious, your body gets into this fight or flight mode where everything gets kind of cranked up, and you're ready to either have a fight or you're ready to run away. And that doesn't really serve us very well when we're trying to do a fine motor performance like play classical music. So beta blockers basically negate the effect of epinephrine. And musicians found out fairly quickly that this actually is quite helpful to classical musicians. You look back in the 1980s, there's surveys of classical musicians that suggest that about a third of classical musicians use these, particularly orchestral performers, stringed instruments in particular. They seem to favor this again because of the fine motor control. But that same musician survey that I talked about just in 2017 suggests that it actually may have gotten even higher. So again, data from 2015 suggesting that about three-quarters of classical musicians have tried beta blockers, and at least a third of them feel that they're very effective. I am not advising you to take these one way or the other. I think if you're interested in giving them a try, please do it by talking to your physician first. There are certain health conditions where you would not want to take a beta blocker. That you could have some serious health consequences from that. They're generally relatively safe drugs, but this is considered a legitimate kind of medical indication. So if you have a talk with your doc about it, you may decide that it's worth a try. Um, I can tell you informally among amateur musicians that the rate of use of beta blockers is probably as high as it is among professional musicians. So, in my experience, upwards of half of amateur performers actually use beta blockers as well. So the competition finally arrives. What to expect? I have a data sheet next on the actual makeup of competitors, at least for the Cliburn competition, where they publish some of that data. There's usually a welcome event, which is quite nice. You get to make a lot of new friends. Everybody's excited. Everybody's really anxious to try things out. There's a turn at trying out the piano. Now, unfortunately, given the large number of entrants usually in the first round, you only get about 10 minutes or so at the piano, but it's well worth it so you're not playing the piano for the first time during the competition. And you also get a sense of what it's like backstage, and you can kind of help visualize what it's like to, travel through the backstage area and come out on stage. There are practice pianos usually available, but I can tell you they're usually not very good. Even at the Cliburn competition in Texas, they were uprights that they were certainly a lot of them available, but I don't think they bothered to tune them when they put them in place. But at least in terms of getting your fingers warmed up and not forgetting how to play the piano in the few days before you play, they're quite nice. And then performance times. Most competitions will assign you a performance schedule, and so you'll know a day or two ahead of time when you're actually going to play. As I mentioned, the Cliburn gave a printout of who actually enters their competition. As you might imagine, it's a worldwide group of people. There were folks from a number of different countries. In the old days, I guess until about 2016, it was mostly medical people, but we seem to have taken a backstage to IT, software, business management people. So all the docs and nurses are getting kind of pushed out of the Cliburn, it seems like. There's always a number of kind of interesting folks. I remember the year I was there, there was a sommelier who was entering the competition as well. But part of the pleasure of these competitions is that there's really all kinds of interesting people that you come across. At the competition, day of the performance, obviously you need a good night's sleep, you need some food, whatever your performance anxiety routine is, you need to deal with. There's usually a green room. They let you warm up for 10 or 20 minutes before you perform. Some of the competitions actually have two green rooms, so you can warm up for the amount of time that it takes the two prior performers to play, which is very nice. Otherwise, at least in the first round, you're often limited to 7 or 8 minutes of warm up before you actually go on stage. Backstage, there's all kinds of things to help. I'm always a big fan of hand warmers. People wear gloves, people bring electric blankets. And the one thing I always appreciate backstage is I really don't want to hear the person playing in front of me. Invariably, they're very good, and the last thing I need to do is feed my performance anxiety by listening to somebody perform flawlessly. Um, After your performance, there's usually an amount of time where you're waiting for your decision. It usually can take quite a while. Again, in the competitions I've been on, it's usually later that evening when they tell you whether you're going to play again or not. And all I can say is if you make it into the competition, or if you make it through the first round, whatever you were doing, you should keep doing it. Seemed like it worked. There are a number of jury awards and audience awards at these competitions. That's always quite fun. So even if you don't turn out to be one of the first, the top three in the competition, at least maybe you'll take home an award for, the best piece of music played by somebody with one hand or something like that. So it's all over. What did you get out of it? I hinted to some of this earlier. You certainly get the chance to play on excellent pianos in wonderful recital halls. These are places where you can't just walk in off the street and play the piano, so it's a wonderful experience to do that. Most of the competitions you receive some very high quality audio video recordings of your performance, which is nice, something you can look back at to remind yourself that it actually did happen. You get a lot of new piano friends. I can tell you that it's almost like the amateur piano mafia, because you go around to these various competitions, and I would say a third to a half of the people are people that you've met at other competitions. So it's not a very big crowd. There are new faces that come in every year, but you do see a lot of familiar faces as well. And certainly there's a lot of inspiration to keep practicing. There's new pieces that you hear other people play. I've actually studied pieces that I've heard people play at these competitions that I thought were really neat. And new interpretations of old pieces. The wonderful thing about amateurs is that they don't always play by the rules, so some of the things they do are actually quite interesting and are almost worth incorporating into your own performance. And also you get jury comments. So where else are you going to get a three or four or five professional musicians to kind of sit down and tell you what they think of your playing. So those are always very useful. Again, sorry, I'm not going to perform any more of those. I think we'll open it up for questions, and my sincere apologies for the audio problems that we've had. Certainly unanticipated. Obviously, there's a learning curve with having set this up. Hopefully, if we do this again, we'll have this fixed going forward. So, let's see if we have a question. Oh, so somebody asked, how often does one have lessons? Uh, Again, this is uh, a decision between you and your teacher. Personally, when I was working towards the competitions, I would have a lesson once a week, um, and in some ways it was very helpful because I knew there were things that I needed to prepare for her, and what happens, obviously we've got other jobs and life gets in the way, and in some ways having a lesson once a week kind of forces you to do your practice and get ready for your next lesson. There's other competitors I know that don't do that as frequently, and there are people that work up a piece and then just have a lesson with somebody when they feel that they need some input from another set of ears. So is there applause to bow? Not quite sure what the question is. Oh, oh, oh. If the question on that is when one bows, does one wait for the applause to end? I'll tell you a funny story, actually. So when I was 17, I played the Mendelssohn G minor piano concerto with the local symphony. First time I'd really done anything like that, and I played it. I enjoyed it. I went out, took my bow. The conductor took me off the stage, and then sent me out for a solo bow. And I got out on stage, and I forgot that you had to leave the stage. So I just stood there because everybody kept applauding, and the conductor had to come out and kind of drag me off the stage. I guess I was intoxicated by the applause. But yeah, for me, the 3 second rule is take a bow for 3 seconds and then get your butt off the stage, and if they want you back again, they'll applaud again. So anyway. So there's a question here. There should be a screen to block the visual input on the job. Oh, yes. So someone has said, you shouldn't really let the visual appearance of somebody impact the judges. And in fact, there are competitions where they do put screens in front of the judges. Seattle is one of those. The judges are behind a screen. And I know that there's certainly professional orchestras where auditions are often carried on behind a screen as well. There's really a debate out there about how important that is. I mean, you know, in some sense, people don't go to listen to people perform live just to hear it, right? If you want to really hear a great performance of a piece, there are plenty of recordings out there that are superb that you're never going to hear in a live performance. So in some ways, for me personally, I think the visual impact is important, and if it can augment the audience's appreciation of the music, I think it's good. Obviously, with judging, that's something else. But most competitions don't have judges. In my experience, most amateur competitions don't have the judges behind a screen. They actually are going to see you on the stage. Okay. How many hours do you practice? Oh boy. So the question is, how many hours do you practice when you're preparing for a competition? So I think people know the Cliburn this year was postponed for 2 years, but in the months leading up to the Cliburn, I was practicing 3 hours a day during the week, and I was trying to put in 5 or 6 hours a day on the weekend. The one thing I can say about that is that's a lot of practice, and I didn't get much else done in my life during that period of time. But I can also say that I noticed improvement, and in some ways I was a little disappointed because when I learned that the competition was canceled, when they announced that, which was I don't know, a couple months before the actual date, I cut back to my usual hour a day or so, and I was I remember thinking, gee, it would have been nice if they kept the competition on, and I kept it up for another couple months because I was quite happy with the progress I was making. Okay. What repertoire are you working on? So there's a question about what repertoire are you working on presently for future competitions, and is it to one's advantage to include more contemporary works? Um, Let me answer the second part of that question first. I'm not sure there's. I think the best thing in a competition is music that you play extremely well. There are examples of people who have won competitions playing, Mozart sonatas or pieces of Bach. The issue is to play it well. Having said that, a lot of people do bring, a breadth of music to a competition, but I think as long as one plays it well, I don't know that there's an advantage or disadvantage to playing a more contemporary piece. I think you want to show off what you do best, and if that happens to be, Bach and Haydn, maybe you ought to go play nothing but Bach and Haydn. I don't know, but yeah, I would say that. And what am I working on for future competition? Thanks, Bob. Bob, I'm working on a number of Chopin etudes. I'm going to try to get through all the Chopin etudes before I die, and I'm also working on the Schumann toccata, which is a pain in the ass. We'll see if that one ever makes it to this stage. So. Um, how do you get the best possible advice on repertoire selection? Again, this is your teacher. I had a number of discussions with my teacher about what made sense and what didn't make sense. She even had some ideas about what should follow what. So she was very worried when with certain key combinations. I have to tell you the truth, I don't quite get it, but if she tells me, play this one first and this one second, it's like, yes, ma'am. So, yeah. Have you received written? Yes, I have. So the question is, have I received written comments from jury members? And the answer is yes, I have. And they're actually extremely good. In fact, I'm amazed sometimes at the caliber of these jurors. The first Cliburn, Olga Kern, was the head jurist, and the things they pointed out, I didn't think people would notice, but they obviously knew the music I was playing and had suggestions here and there. It's also wonderful when they tell you a particular aspect of the music is done very well. It's really really very nice. Written comments are very very nice. So, have I ever seen competitors just freeze and walk off the stage? No, I haven't. So that, but I have heard that happens. Um, but hopefully it's not too traumatic for that person. The idea is for above all for people to go here and enjoy themselves and have a really nice experience. It is very stressful, and there are people who play better than other folks, and but no, I've never seen anybody walk off the stage. Do you practice at home mostly? Just wondering if you tried any other place to practice. So my piano is at home. I actually have two pianos. I have a grand piano in the living room, and I have a digital piano in the back bedroom. My poor wife really has listened to me practice a lot, and in fact, she was the reason that I got the digital piano, because if I'm just working on a piece to memorize it, to learn the notes, I go back to the digital piano. I put a pair of headphones on, and I practice that way as much as I can. But obviously, you need to practice on a quote unquote real piano, and I generally do practice at home. Um, so the question is, wondering if you tried any other place to practice using a different piano or to focus more. It's a good idea. For me, I certainly enjoy performing on other pianos because I don't think you want to get wedded to one piano, particularly if you have at home a very, very nice piano and it's going to be better than anything you play on most of the time. It's a little bit of a letdown to then go play on a piano that actually is not in, tip-top shape. And I'm sure all pianists know that they're going to come across those kind of pianos from time to time. A quick story, I remember reading Arthur Rubinstein's autobiography, and he talks once about how this town in, I think it was Spain, invited him to come perform, and they were all excited because they'd bought a new piano particularly for this performance, and he gets on stage and it was an upright. So yeah, he played anyway, but and I'm sure on an upright he sounds better than me on a grand piano. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting story. Where are we here? Uh, yeah. So, what is considered an excellent performance? What are the judges looking for in a performance? First of all, it doesn't have to be mistake free. There's a certain amount of tolerance, I find anyway, a certain amount of tolerance for a little slip here and there. That won't keep you from advancing in the competition. Obviously, if it comes down to a choice to somebody who's played technically perfectly and interpreted the music correctly versus somebody who maybe interpreted the music correctly but probably could have used another 6 months of practice, the former is going to win. But the wonderful thing about this is it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be musical from my point of view. So I think the judges pay a lot of attention to the interpretation and the musicality of the piece. Just going through some of the questions here. So I've heard there's a strategy for selecting pieces for each round. The only strategy I would say is the stuff you play in the very first round, particularly if this is your first competition, ought to be the stuff you're really, really comfortable with. I think after that, you kind of get your feet wet. You understand what's going on. You can probably be push pieces that are a little newer, a little newer for you to the second or the third round. But yeah, the only advice I would have is select pieces early on. Unfortunately, I again apologize for the video, but the piece I played in the first round of Cliburn, the first movement from the Beethoven Opus 2 number 1, I played that when I was like 15. So it was a matter of kind of resurrecting it, but it certainly was a lot more familiar to me than a piece that I might have learned in the last year or two. So, question, do you use any electronic aids? So I certainly use a metronome when I need a metronome. I think particularly, in passages that really demand some attention to rhythm and consistency, I don't have any trouble using a metronome. But the other question is about recording or playing with a recording. I actually didn't do much recording. I didn't find that as useful as performing. And as you remember, I was saying that basically everybody that walked down my block was pulled into the house and had to sit down and listen to me play. So I got more personally. I think I got more out of performing as much as I could as opposed to recording and then listening back to it. But I know other folks make more use of recording and kind of criticize, look at recordings. Actually, I will say when I do performances, I record them and then I go listen to the performance myself. This probably is familiar to other musicians, but when I perform, I don't feel I'm a very good judge of how I play. For me, if you ask me 30 minutes after I perform a piece, it's almost like I can't quite recreated in my mind the way I played it. So I like to be able to listen to it again, and that's when I kind of critically go through the manuscript and look at things that I think could be fixed up. All right. Yeah, let's try it. So again, thank you very much for listening. My sincere apologies about the microphone issues. I think Lulu wants to have a few more words, and let me see if I can get her on here without making. And that's when I kind of critically go through the manuscript and look at things that I think could be fixed up. All right. Yeah, let's try it. So again, thank you very much for listening. My sincere apologies about the microphone issues. I think Lulu wants to have a few more words, and let me see if I can get her on here without making. And that's when I kind of critically go through the manuscript and look at things that I think could be fixed up. All right. Yeah, let's try it. So again, thank you very much for listening. My sincere apologies about the microphone issues. I think Lulu wants to have a few more words, and let me see if I can get her on here without making. And that's when I kind of critically go through the manuscript and look at things that I think could be fixed up. Yeah, let's try it. So again, thank you very much for listening. My